Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bite Marks. And today we are back on our podcast. Yeah, today we're actually going to be doing a special episode, and that means we have a guest. But of course, joining me is my lovely co-host Callum. Say hello.
Hello.
By the way, my pronouns are he, him. Callum?
Yeah, I have those.
And we are going to be talking about a very touchy subject, which I find to be personally very interesting, which of course is the fascist obsession with AI-generated images. And of course, if we're going to be talking about art, that means that we have got to be joined by our resident art expert, Sibu. Say hello, Sibu.
Hi, everyone. Nice to be back. It's been some time. I also use he, him pronouns, and yeah, AI and art is something that I unfortunately think about quite a lot.
Did you know that you were our resident expert?
No.
It's
nice to be promoted. I think before I was kind of like a vagrant expert.
You have tenure, don't worry.
Nice.
Yeah. You passed the adjunct professor stage, and now you're on the tenure track. So yeah, for the viewers at home who might not remember the last episode, I think I'll try and link them in the description. Why don't you tell us a bit about your background, Sibu, and sort of like your qualifications, I guess.
Sure. So I am an art and design educator. My background is in studying education after studying fine art. I've always had a bit of a techie side to the type of art that I like in terms of what I appreciate and what I make. So AI art has been something that's sort of like on my radar for a long time, but not quite in the form that it's taken now. In my undergrad, I think that's when Google started playing around with its Google Deep Dream generative AI program. And there were also other artists, names I've forgotten, but who worked with this concept of procedural art and would use programs, algorithms that they coded themselves and trained on their own images and artworks to then continuously generate output. And the artwork wasn't so much the outcome, but the process. So yeah, I guess to just cap it up, I'm an art nerd, I'm a nerd, and I teach.
All right, awesome. So the genesis of this conversation really began in the place where conversations go to die, which is, of course, Facebook. And I had gotten onto Facebook, as one does, and I had seen an obviously AI-generated image of like starving African children that had somehow bodged together a scrap version of Jesus Christ. And obviously, I thought to myself,
was it their birthday?
Yeah, it was their birthday.
You know in Berserk, when like the God Hand invade the mortal realm for the first time and the rats come together to make like the shape of one of them, like that's all I can think of is like African children building a monument to a god they've never heard of and never seen before as such like an omen of the apocalypse.
It deeply struck me as, I don't know, it just felt weird and wrong. And I don't know, something snapped inside of me. I just spent like an hour or so interrogating the person who posted this image about why they had done this obviously heinous thing. And I think I was... I basically, because I had seen that one image and because I made a bunch of posts about comments about that under that image face, that I wanted to see more of those images. So for a good day or so afterwards, every time I opened up, well, maybe about 3 days, every time I opened up Facebook, I would be given more of these weird AI images. And I would always, well, firstly, I don't like them. I'm not a big fan of any of this. But I would look in the comments and I would just see the weirdest, most conservative people just talking about this stuff in a sort of strange way, right? And then I started just sort of pulling on this thread. And then I started getting into like looking at groups of people that are, a lot of it is Trump, right? A lot of it is Trump. AI-generated images of Trump. And so I started looking, and then I sort of got this idea that, like, yeah, the fascists are actually kind of the ones who are obsessed with generative AI. And hence this conversation. So just to clarify, we won't really be delving into any technical details, necessarily on this podcast. We're primarily going to be talking about culture and society and art. So I think to start, Sibu, why don't you maybe just sort of give start us off with sort of your general idea about why it is that somebody, specifically a conservative person, might be very receptive to AI-generated images?
So I think The thing that I think would make AI most attractive to someone who's got a more conservative or regressive view of the world is probably linked to the fact that a lot of conservative ideas are based on a past that never existed. So they don't have any real history to refer back to in a very clean and in a way that really suits the narrative that they try to construct about what the world should be like. Because we know that there was never a time where there were no black people in Europe. If you go back into antiquity, you'll find instances and records of interactions between people from Africa and people from Europe and people from Asia. And if you look sort of closer to modern times, as soon as the colonial moment is initiated, it flows both ways. So there was never a time really that you could point to as being pure and homogeneous, and the quote-unquote good old days never existed. So much like any other kind of social project, it relies on a construction of shared imagery. And in the past, that would have been things like, your Norman Rockwell style paintings of Americana. Not to say that he was a right wing. I'm just saying like that kind of style of painting. Or it could also be seen in things like the weird amount of racist art, like blackface and gollywog toys and illustrations. All of these things that serve to create this and maintain this idea of distinction and segregation in a way that reflects the legal and material world in the artistic world. So I think AI, it's a shortcut. I think that's the first thing. I think that the arts aren't always very valued, and AI tends to make the kind of art that I think a lot more conservative people, or at least not necessarily politically active people as well, might find appealing. It's generally realistic enough that they can understand what they're looking at. It can include a level of symbolism that is readily understandable versus something that's a lot more abstract or perhaps a bit more expressive. And I think artists that tend to shine a light on social issues, if we look at it throughout time, they often shy away from the more glamorizing and idealizing style of painting or of making images. So if you look at someone like Otto Dix from the new sorry, the name of the movement is escaping me right now. But he was a German artist, a painter, who was part of a movement called New Objectivity. And it's very similar to Expressionism in the sense that they distorted their representation in order to create images that spoke a little bit more to the degradation of living standards of his time. So this would have been around the early 20th century, so leading up to the First World War and in between World War I and World War II, the living conditions of the ordinary person compared to that of the wealthy, the conditions of the soldiers who would come back from war, their bodies damaged and disabled, their minds as well. So his kind of art was very disturbing to look at, because that was the kind of feeling that he wanted to evoke. Yeah.
I mean, just following on with that thread, two things sort of stand out to me. When you talked about how, there's this idealization of like things that don't exist, something that comes across is that in a lot of these AI generated images of Trump, they never draw him. It's never drawn as he looks, right? He's always drawn as this like very fit looking person. Even Ben Garrison comics, right? Ben Garrison comics, which are not AI generated yet, always draw Trump as this Superman looking fellow, right? Which I think is very interesting. It's almost as they can look at him, right? They can see him. He's ancient and he's overweight and he's just falling apart, but he's always drawn as this sort of Ubermensch almost in a way. I guess
it's like it's perfect for conservatives because now they get to do revisionism immediately. They don't have to wait like 100 years for people to kind of forget what happened before they start selling like the new, this is what actually happened. They can just do it now. They can be like, no, yeah, Trump has an 8-pack and he can beat up every Democrat with one hand.
Yeah, there's a AI generated image of Trump physically beating Bernie Sanders in a fight.
I think what Callum mentioned about the idea of start the revisionism early, that's also like a stock standard play out of the book to muddy the waters, and we can kind of see that showing up a little bit with recently one of the White House press releases, and also I guess closer to home, AI has been used as a way of deflecting criticism from or aimed at politicians. So Joe Biden being old and saying weird stuff, someone passed that off as a deep fake.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
Ronaldo hosts racist tirades on his Facebook and YouTube. Helen Zilla trying to say it might have been you try to say that it might have been also a deep fake or an AI generated video, and the fact that Ronaldo himself, I think, was the one who floated that suggestion. So I think there's a couple of things aside from like the kind of images that can be created, just also the fact that
it's the threat of it.
Yeah, and the fact that these, if you know what AI looks like, you can pick it out pretty quickly. But there are some models that are generating really like high fidelity images that I've had to double take or spend a little bit longer trying to figure out, is this real or not? You can't count on counting the fingers anymore. You've got to really pay attention to what you're looking at, and I don't think a lot of people do that.
No. I mean, who was the actress who played Leia again? Carrie
Fisher.
Carrie Fisher is in one of the new movies, despite having died.
Yes.
And it looks like her. It is a almost like you can kind of, if you really focus on it, you can see that it's too clean cut. It's not a person. It's too symmetrical, but like it's still at a glance, it looks just like her, and that is terrifying.
I mean, they did that to Peter Cushing in Rogue One. Grand Moff Tarkin appears at the end of that movie. I got spoiler alert for Rogue One. But they had digitally transposed his face, basically, on that. And it is kind of scary in that sense. In terms of the technology, I'm a little bit maybe more optimistic than most in terms of like how good it's actually going to be able to get. But that I think is maybe a bit more of a technical discussion. Something that you also talked about that I found interesting is, with regards, especially to what you said, Callum, about being able to reshift the narrative. I think one major advantage of this technology is it creates a low trust environment. You don't know, you could just flood the Facebook or whatever with all kinds of images that take virtually no effort to produce and just sort of obfuscate any sort of real kind of thing, I think that conservatives really thrive in that kind of environment where people aren't paying a lot of attention because it's just noise.
Yeah, it's a case of like as soon as the conservatives can, I'm talking about them like they're the fucking White Walkers. As soon as the conservatives descend upon the land and start spreading out a mass of information, they can just so easily do stuff. They can do whatever they want at any point, and then a lot of us will have to sit there and be like, okay, is this fake? Is this generated? Did this actually happen? Or what? And eventually it's going to be so much easier to just ignore everything.
Yeah.
Like, it's a too much news problem where it's like, yeah, it's great that we have all of this information now, but we can't possibly absorb all of it. So you have to pick the ones that appeal to you. And that's good because it means that people start getting a bit more like critical, but like, because people lack those critical thinking skills in a lot of cases, they pick the wrong news. They pick the one that is spreading misinformation, and generative AI is just so good at that.
Yeah, I think that's bang on. Like the low trust, the obfuscation, the muddied waters. It also makes it hard to have that conversation because in the past you'd end up with things like people saying, "Oh well, let's just agree to disagree," which is like the most bullshit end to an argument. but you're also not kind of dealing with what I find is a more insidious type of AI generation, which is text-based. I know we're veering off topic a little bit, but with generated text, it's a lot harder to suss it out. You know, like we're long past the days of does Bruno Mars is gay, but we.
If we could have stayed in those days,
yeah,
but we still have the problem of like a lot of noise, just a bunch of bullshit that you have to sift through, and it's tiresome. You know, like I can honestly believe that it's just done as another thing to wear people down. Because if you don't have the skills to easily discern when something is likely true or not, then it's that much harder. Because I think I'm pretty sure everyone has a similar sort of story, but like your older relatives are the ones who get bamboozled by these types of images or these types of stories or videos. The voice cloning that you can do with AI now is scarily accurate.
Just to interrupt for a second. I totally agree. It is definitely old people who are for sure being bamboozled by a lot of this stuff. But I wouldn't necessarily say that young people are also like especially immune to it either. I've looked a bit into the research, and it seems to suggest that old people show up disproportionately because they have more money to lose. But young people also tend to be very easily scammed by a lot of this stuff, because one of the major things about it is that they don't remember a time before any of this stuff, right? If you're growing up and all of this stuff is just normalized, then your ability to sort of suss out what isn't real is heavily affected. And, you know, young people are spending more and more time online, so that sort of blurs the issue, you know, a bit further. I don't think this is necessarily a problem that will just, you know, all the boomers will die and then suddenly it won't be an issue anymore, you know?
Well, I think it's also the difference is that like old people will be bamboozled by this, but young people will be influenced by this because it just becomes part of the normal.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, thank you. Did you know I do words for a living? It's like seeing street art. You know, it's like walking down the street and seeing like a thing on the wall. The first time you see it, it's surprising, but eventually you walk past that thing enough times, it becomes a part of the wall. You know, you see people like it's what happened with cyberbullying for such a long time. Is like it just became the norm. Like the first time it happened, it was a big deal, and then it was just like this is just part of being online now. Is that people call you a slur, and then you have to deal with that. And generative AI is going that way. It's going to become that thing of like, oh yeah. There are always going to be people who misuse it. Don't you understand how humans work?
Yeah, I think it definitely does just lower the barrier in terms of that misuse. Because in the past, you needed to actually have some kind of skill to doctor images or to create falsehoods visually. And now it's easy enough that, you know, anyone who's willing to just take the time to enter a prompt, you know, you get your thing, pay a bit of money for your usage fee, you're fine. But I think, yeah, if I think about the way that this appeals to conservatives, I often find myself maybe sifting through how I understand conservatives to be, or the different sort of like strata, because we can see the obvious use for conservatives in power, and we know that a lot of conservative people who support negative policies will do that despite the fact that it can be harmful for themselves, and we can see that AI is going to be harmful for the average person for a long time, until there's some kind of, you know, policy-based curtailment of its prevalence. But I think what still kind of strikes me is there seems to have been some sort of mutation in what conservatism is. Like, it has shifted so far right that we don't really have much centrist representation in a way. I miss that almost. Like, it was easy enough to
we bullied
argue.
all the centrists into becoming right wing.
I don't even think that's the case. I think it's just that, like,
they were always right wing, and now they just don't have to pretend anymore.
They don't have to pretend anymore. But also, like, the type of person who would get online and honestly, I think that's the type of conservative that we're really talking about, is the ones who will use like AI generated images on Twitter or on Facebook to kind of like rile up interactions. And like I've been seeing a whole bunch of things like in the run up to the British elections that just took place. It'll be things like a crying blonde girl wearing a Union Jack on her shirt in like a distorted bus full of brown people laughing at her. And it's like it's propaganda. It's just there to to like agitate these feelings of mistrust and fear. And I think in that regard, that's maybe like where we I don't want to say lose, but where we lose out on as coming from the left, is that I think a foundational aspect is that you need to focus on the reality, the lived experiences and conditions of the people that you're trying to work with, the people that you're trying to help, and the people who are part of your community. You need to focus on what is real. But what is real is hardly ever as provocative as what is imagined. And
this is fan fiction. This is what this used to be, was commissioning an artist on DeviantArt to draw your original character, so that you can use it as your profile picture. But now it's just like pressing a few buttons and your fan fiction becomes quote unquote real. I mean, I literally, just before we started, I showed a tweet from Paul Golding, who I think is a British politician, to Emilio and Sibu. And it's a picture of like AI generated Jesus walking down the street with a bunch of crusaders. It is nothing. It is nothing as an image. It says nothing. It means nothing. It's purely there to get people to be like, that's so, why are you doing it? It's engagement farming, but politically.
Paul Golding is a far-right politician, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's part of the British First sort of type dealio. But it is a very strange image, because the caption of that image is, "This explains my politics perfectly," and it kind of does.
Yeah, because it's nothing. It's literally just icons, and that's the problem. Is that like AI generated art can't be subtle. It doesn't understand subtlety, because subtlety or context, because that's a very human thing, and it can get messy and weird and complicated, and it's so subjective. AI cannot do that. It cannot like make things in the background or little details that make the image like make more sense. It can only do the big stuff, which is why it always feels so empty.
I'm personally a fan of those pterodactyls circling Big Ben and the Ferris wheel. I'm not sure what those are supposed to be. Airplanes?
I just saw that.
I think, I think it probably is. Maybe it's meant to be like the image generator pulled from like a World War II database or something, because it's trying to like represent a British plane, but it can't quite pull that out, or something like that.
I think it's trying to do birds, but it can't do perspective.
Yeah, we could spend infinity debating the madness of this. It's just like Paul Golding is a kind of guy who maybe should have just gotten into Warhammer, but he didn't, and now he's a political leader.
But like the thing is, if Paul Golding had gone to an artist, like, because there are conservative artists. That's never been. Everyone seems to think that like as soon as you become an artist, they give you a beret and a penis to like suck. That's not how it works. You just can draw good. But if Paul Golding had gone to an artist, they would have been like, "Hey, dude, this is not a good idea for these reasons. Maybe we should try something else." And then they could have made a good image that is both provocative and actually, means something. But instead, he put in a bunch of words into a prompt, and he got this travesty. A
historical nonsense in the streets of London sounds like Britain First, a manifesto.
But it is pure fan fiction. Like it is alternate history fan fiction. And like Nazis on Twitter and stuff do this shit all the time, where they get like an image that shows like a Nazi person in like this super sleek uniform in like a cool background with striking colors and shit, and it's like, this is nothing. This is fan fiction. This is not what the Nazis looked like.
It's really interesting that you mentioned this, because a while back, Sibu and I did an episode on basically Italian futurism, which sounds like it would be a cool art movement, but it ended up being a bad art movement. Futurism was one of the precursors to, in some ways, fascism, right? Many of the famous Italian futurists were also big supporters of Mussolini. And I was reading some research papers, that talked about this a little bit more. And one thing kind of keeps coming up. I think in some ways, a lot of the ideological roots for this obsession, with AI art stuff was there back in the 40s, but they didn't have the technology to do it yet. If you read how, guys like Marinetti, right, who was one of the big futurists.
He was the founder.
Yeah, he was the founder. The way he talks about technology, the way that he talks about like machines and violence and, how women are corrupting society, it sort of gives me this idea that, like, if he were alive today,
he'd be a base Sigma pulled.
Yeah, but he would be endlessly generating AI images, right? He would be talking about like AI generated images as like, this is the Ubermensch technology. Like, we don't need the Jewish artist or whatever. We have freed ourselves with this Aryan technology. Never mind that image generation technology is often a sort of an international endeavor. But it fascinates me because I think that the seeds were there, right? If you read what the futurists talked about, in terms of technology, and don't read about how they wrote about women, right? It's just weird.
Yeah, I think I'd rather implement a futurist like cooking recipe before I take any of their advice on anything else. But I think that's a good point. The futurists, another thing that they kind of have in common with AI is a strong lack of originality. Very little that the futurists did was unique to the movement, even at the time. And I mentioned this in that podcast, but a big critique against many futurist artists was that their stuff was derivative, it was boring. It wasn't more interesting than things made by the Impressionists, the Neo-Impressionists, the Cubists.
Oh yeah,
so there was kind of a dearth of creativity and wonder, and I think that's maybe something that's also linked to the affinity for AI imagery from these conservative talking heads and their followers. Is that I think if you have that kind of personality that can value art, nothing about like the quality of the art, but just as a process or as an endeavor, a human experience, I think you'd realize that the things that the machine makes, even if it gets to a point where it's like absolute one-to-one likeness of an artist or something made by a person, it will always be missing that sort of, you can call it the soul or the spark or just like the human desire to make something. That will always be missing. And I think my experience of conservative people is that they're generally quite incurious, no real desire to understand more than what's immediately in front of them. If something isn't entertaining, then it's not really worth engaging with. Or if it doesn't affirm what they already think or know, then again, it's also just not really worth interacting with. I think that AI images are kind of in that realm. They allow people who don't want to engage with the difficult aspects of making art to make art. They allow people who don't want to spend time understanding another person's perspective to kind of like just type in their thoughts, type in their words, and get that outcome.
So let me ask you this, Ben.
Yeah.
Do you think that part of the way that, at least, a facet of this conservative fixation with AI art is actually kind of a reflection of maybe sort of two things? One is that there's like an institutional disdain for artists, right? Fascists sort of notoriously always hated various types of artists, especially progressive artists, LGBT artists, etc., etc. So by using sort of AI-generated images, they're like getting one up, I guess, quote unquote, on real artists. And then the other question is, do you think that maybe it's like a reflection of fascist insecurity, right? Which is, to do art is to struggle. Anybody who's done real art can tell you just how difficult it is to actually just get good at doing anything. You spend hours, trying to draw a hand. And there's an insecurity that they don't want to grapple with. And maybe that's why they sort of fixate on it, because it allows them to obfuscate that insecurity. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you put it well there. I think there's sorry, derailed a little bit, but I think that there's the insecurity, there's the ability to kind of like mask that and I guess evade the difficulties inherent in art. But I think there's also something like there's a stigma attached to being an artist in some ways, and it's something that you feel as the kind of pervasive interaction when you tell someone that you're studying art. They'll say, "Oh, but how are you going to make a living?" So there's this inherent idea that art is
useless,
superfluous, useless. Yeah,
like you have to be at the top of your field or you're nothing.
Right, and like that's unfortunately not inaccurate, because a lot of the money does pool towards a certain strata of artists. It's very difficult to break through, and we're also sitting at a point where, in so many countries, with there being so little material support available for people, like housing is major cost in much of the developing world. In much of the developed world, it's expensive to live. In the developing world, you've got more problems before you can get to making a living off your art. So I think there's kind of like you're right in that idea of like it's kind of getting one up and saying, look, you wasted your time developing these skills. We can do it now at the touch of a button. It's kind of like there is a kind of, I guess you could call it arrogance or malevolence.
It's ultimately like a paradox, isn't it? Because the world that fascists claim that they want to create is one where everyone's like an expert. They're at the top of their field and they're contributing to the crown, for lack of a better word, like the leader. They're contributing to the state. And it's ridiculous, because if that was the case, if those were the only people that exist in your country, you would be in a room with like 20 people that you couldn't relate to, because that's not literally, as we're seeing now with generative AI. Fascists don't want to put the hard work into being at the top of the field. They want to do things at the touch of a button. They don't want to learn how to draw a straight line. They want a machine to do it for them, which means that they won't be qualified for anything.
Yeah, that's super interesting, because I do think that, like, fundamentally there is a root cause of insecurity there, right? Like, why draw Trump? Why draw Trump as this like god emperor type figure? Because they're insecure about what he actually is like. Most leftists will readily tell you that Joe Biden is a walking corpse who shouldn't have been, sent out there to become president again after barely surviving this last one. But
someone just needs to break his phylactery so that he can pass on finally.
But people don't talk that way about Donald Trump, do they? They talk about him as if he's a spring chicken, as if he's as good as now as he was 20 years ago.
He's like 50 something, guys.
No, Donald Trump is 70.
He's 70?
Yeah, he's ancient.
Yeah,
dude, Trump, he's been preserved. He had like
78.
that powder that comes in 2-minute noodles. He's like been doused in that. He is pickled. Callum,
Donald Trump was born the year after World War II ended.
Jesus.
He was born in 1946.
It's one of those things of like when conservatives get so mad, especially like conservative tech bros get so mad when they use the like, oh, he started out of his garage story to try and like humanize a billionaire, and then people point out, no, he didn't. He had a $1 million loan, or he worked off of the bones of his father's company, which was already worth like almost $1 billion or something. And they get so mad at that because it's like, yeah, you can't relate to this person. They don't care about you. Your ideology does not foster relating to people. So you have to idealize.
Yeah. I think there's also kind of like a necrotic mentality that has trickled down from right-wing leaders into right-wing supporters, where there's this idea that they need to protect resources for them and their kind, and that will be at the expense of everyone else, bad other. But there's kind of like a weird categorization of labor and types of work. So, it's good to be a business owner and a job creator. It's bad to have that kind of job. Like, nobody wants to be a cashier or a retail worker, but people want to build their retail, drop shipping companies or outlets. People want to own the business. People don't want to necessarily pay the people who do the business. And I think
it's like
with AI, you can kind of circumvent people who do art, people who make images. You can, it's shit to say, but probably the AI is making things that these people could never dream of creating. So it is better than them. It's not good, but its output is better. Yeah, it's a low bar to clear.
Yeah. But it's that, just to go back off of what you said, it's that thing of like, people think it's you have to be the person that creates jobs, but if everyone was that, we'd have a whole bunch of like empty restaurants and empty office buildings and stuff. Like, you need people to work in those jobs, and if you want that, you need to create like a good working environment for them. The problem with like AI that has, what's the word, mechanized, I guess, automated art, is that like you are now taking away jobs from people who are qualified to do that, and you're telling them to go and get real jobs, by which you mean create more jobs for other people to not want to do, so that they can go and it's an endless like Ouroboros of stupid.
Well, I guess, like the logical resolution to that paradox is that a lot of the time these types of conservative people don't actually think that, like the blue-haired Tumblr woman should be a business owner. They might not even want her to work at a business.
Yeah.
They think that she should be, crushed under the heels of the, this beast of corporate and government. But, there's an idea that some people deserve those kinds of bad jobs, and they should just be happy with their lot in life.
I think, especially with the idea of automation. Now, I think anybody who's trying to sell you on the idea of like full automation is sort of selling shovels in a gold rush kind of situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
The number one most valuable company now in the world is not an AI company, it's Nvidia, right? Because they're the ones who are selling the gold in the the shovels in the gold rush, right? They're the ones who are selling the GPUs for all the AI projects. Whether or not an AI project will actually become that valuable, that's hard to say. But I think a lot of these conservatives don't think the blue-haired woman deserves to even exist, right?
Right.
Yeah. I don't think they even want her to exist. So, Caleb, I think
we need to feed her to Liberty Prime.
I don't think they even care. They don't care about the fact that some people don't have a path to a successful or easy life. They just don't want that person to exist, right? And if that person is vocal about the fact that they want to exist, that they want to have a life, that they want, a comfortable existence, and so on and so forth, well, the conservative answer to that is no. We'll throw you into a giant meat grinder, right? We'll do something particularly heinous, because the dividing line between all of this stuff is there are some people who deserve to have things, and then there are not people, right?
Yeah.
There are some. It's a heinous, right? It's totally heinous, but that's how they think.
Wow.
Right. And I think to go back to what Sibu said earlier, I think it's gotten to the point where you aren't really going to find a person in the middle as much anymore. A conservative who's like, I don't think that these people. I think these people are quote unquote bad, but I think they should be allowed to exist or whatever. I think more and more of them are moving towards the I just don't want this person to exist. And if you remind me that this person exists, then I will remind you that we can throw them into a wood chipper or something.
I mean, I guess that's another point in the favor of generative AI for conservatives, is like, while you were saying that, it just made me think, how can people think that and then still think they're the good guys? Like, have they not seen movies or read books or whatever? Like, everyone who is the person who says like, hey, I don't think you should exist, they're the bad guy. But generative AI can make it so that that's not the case. They can, at the push of a button, be like, oh, hey, no, we're the good guys. Look, we're the good guys.
I think it's an interesting sort of question. And Sibu, I do actually want to pick your brain a little bit more about this. I think that, this generative AI stuff didn't exist in a vacuum, right? Generally speaking, conservatives have been maligned in a media sense for a long time, and most of them don't have media literacy, right? It's not as if there's a compulsory media literacy class that you can take in high school that'll show you how to analyze media and make sense of it. So kind of like we're heading a bit to almost like a post-truth world, right? And I think that is the kind of environment that they want to be in. Because if nothing can be verified as true, if nothing, if like dead internet theory is true and the internet actually is just dead, then they get to, what is that Foucault quote about arguing with an anti-Semite, right?
Right.
It's that kind of situation where they know, right? They might be very stupid in a lot of ways, but they do know what their game is, right?
Yeah.
And that I think is the key thing that maybe some of our more left-leaning viewers might have to get sort of take away from this, which is the conservatives might be dumb, but they do know the game that they're playing, and they do tend to be able to play that game very well, which is the problem, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely accurate. Like there's almost like an honesty in their dishonesty. We understand, or we should understand, that as long as we're engaging with someone who's being racist, being sexist, being advocating for the death of minorities or whatever it might be, as long as you're trying to convince them otherwise, all you're doing is sustaining a platform for them to talk, to have their points come across. Like when I was growing up on the internet in the 2000s, there were like the rules that your parents and your teachers made for the internet, like don't give out personal information, don't share pictures, don't upload pictures of other people, and all of those were to like keep us safe. But the rules once you were on the internet, there are all the jokes about things like Rule 34 and what have you, but a rule that I think we've all forgotten is don't feed the troll. As soon as someone pops into your forum or your chat and they're causing trouble, they want a response. Even if that response is you negating them, they want you to engage, because when you engage with them, other people end up seeing that happening, seeing that engagement. And I think if we think about the internet today, it is the internet of engagement. If you go onto TikTok, if you go onto Reels, if you go onto Twitter, you'll see people posting low effort enragement bait. It can be something as silly as like a order of operations gone wrong, or it could be something inflammatory like, crying blonde girl on a bus full of Muslims. But the point for all of it is always to just normalize it, turn it into something that you can put out there, and to get it pushed to other people's feeds, because the algorithms I presume, probably don't care too much about negative interaction as long as there's interaction. Twitter doesn't have any visible negative metrics. There's no dislike button. There are likes, there are retweets, and there are comments, responses. So if you like something, that's positive. If you retweet it, could be either way, but you're drumming up this thing's importance. So I think as far as AI goes, the best thing we can do is try and like promote awareness of like, this is AI. There are real reasons not to use it, and reject it flat out for that reason. And on top of that, when we start seeing, conservative drivel coming out of the AI machines, that should be our approach even more sort of, I don't know what the word would be, but like to a more stringent degree, is to do our best to shut it down. But at the same time, it is tricky because how will we know what the fight is or what the arguments are if we ignore
them?
Yeah.
That's the problem, is that like conservatives are totally okay with doing heinous shit in the background. Like if we ignore them, they'll still do bad things, and the issue is that it might get like more and more if the longer we ignore them. It's a real, like, obviously on the internet, ignore conservatives. That's the best thing you can do. Very few people can actually hurt you over the internet. So Just if you ignore them, that's fine. When conservatives do like make political movements in actual politics, you don't have to ignore that.
Yeah.
But like when you're face to face with, you know, JC Creasy walking down the London road with a whole bunch of crusaders and some dude from Britain is saying this explains my politics, just look away. He has nothing to say to you. Just scroll on by.
Well, I will say, like, if we go back to the idea of someone like Host, who was a troll, was an internet person, and has gotten some traction as a real world political figure. Trump as well, you know, he always had this bombastic personality on the internet. I think, yeah, the two go hand in hand. Ignore, crush, quash, sequester these harmful ideas and the people that espouse them, but in reality use the similar methods of moderation of trying to negate and diminish the possible impact that these types of people can have.
You know, speaking of harassment, I realized that and you know, online stuff, I think I realized another reason why they might like it, because all this AI generated stuff has enabled the only industry that the AI industry has really disrupted is the harassment industry, right? As part of my research for this, I remember reading a lot about how people were falling victim to things like AI generated images of classmates and stuff like that, you know, like generating somebody's nudes. And number one, I felt sick reading that. That's pretty disgusting. But it kind of sort of gives the game away, you know, where it's like, yeah, if you don't think, I don't know, if you're a conservative and you don't believe, for example, in the concept of consent, then you wouldn't think that there's anything wrong with sort of generating and then proliferating an image of your classmate, because you already don't think that they can really fundamentally say no to you, you know, or that maybe you feel like you're entitled to them, you know. I think that one way that, because, you know, as you said earlier, in order to do that previously, you need to be able to do Photoshop, right? Now,
and even then, you would have to have like several photos. You'd have to like put in the effort to match body types and things like that. It would be a whole process of doing that, and now you can do it with like a prompt.
Yeah, exactly. I think that that's probably why a lot of them do like it, because it enables that. Like, if you want to just AI generate an image that's offensive, you can do that. You can just put that out there, right? You can just, you know, do all kinds of pretty heinous stuff, and, you know, not to mention all the stuff that you can do with text. You know, it's a revolutionary new vector in harassment, and they probably like it for that reason as well, because they're always looking for ways to harass people.
Yeah.
It's the other thing is, I remember you said earlier that like a lot of times these kinds of people don't want to engage with anything if it's not entertaining, and it makes me think about, like, just to pull back into another thing that this podcast is about, games. How many games do you remember from the last few years being super popular that was like procedurally generated, as opposed to something like, I don't know, Elden Ring, that is made specifically by people with an artistic vision in mind, with context and so on. That
maybe Hades.
I mean,
but I would argue as well that maybe the things that people remember about Hades are not the level design. It's all the cool characters who are super hot and stuff like that.
It's the story. It's the context. Like, when people talk about The Binding of Isaac, do they talk about how it's super cool that the levels change every single time? No, they talk about things like, oh, if you get these certain items, which consistently work these ways, then you can create this combo. The procedural generation is like a flash in the pan, interesting concept at first that immediately fades into the background as you're playing the game, so that you can hold on to the things that stay consistent. And that's that's why these kinds of things don't have any staying power. Sure, you can procedurally generate art that has zero meaning, but without the context of like Hades' characters and story, without the context of, you know, the specific design sensibilities of The Binding of Isaac, without any of that sort of context and vision, those games would have just faded away. Like every other procedurally generated game that said it can promise you a universe without realizing there's no amount of interest I have that can force me to explore an entire universe of
Yeah, I mean,
the
that
same.
that was the whole downfall of No Man's Sky in the beginning. So it's like a whole bunch of nothing.
And then it
But I
became the
think,
downfall of that one that Bethesda made.
what was that?
Starfield?
Starfield, yeah.
Oh, right.
Starfield also was like we made a whole galaxy, and it's like
Space
cool.
Run.
All the planets are the same.
Yeah, I think that's kind of at the heart of what has been my biggest disappointment with generative AI or AI in general as it's being pitched to us now is that it's not making it's not easing the drudgery. You know, if I think of something that came out a couple years ago that was a hit because of the AI that was used, would be the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse movie, where the Sony animators used machine learning to add the little expressive lines and details in the animation that would have been too cumbersome to do by hand, but the machine could replicate the details as if they were done by hand and could learn where they should go. And it still required some people, you know, like human intervention to make sure that it looked good. But I think this is kind of where the big schism arises, I guess, between various people around the argument of AI and its role in human artistic and creative endeavors. There are a lot of things in an artist's day-to-day practice that have no bearing on the artist's ability, but if they're not done, will hinder the output. You know, and I think about things like sharpening my pencils if I'm thinking about some tactile traditional media, or if I think about making a collage on Photoshop, being able to use masking and selecting to isolate an image or part of an image from the whole. Those aren't creative skills, but they would still be skills that an artist needs to have and be able to do. And some of them are very low skill. Like, it doesn't take a genius to sharpen a pencil. We let, you know, primary school kids do it because it doesn't require any training. You stick your pencil in a sharpener, Bob's your uncle. But, you know, there are things within digital art that I think AI could be phenomenal at assisting in. And I think we are kind of, unfortunately, now at a point where instead of that being the way that it was marketed as something that can help you make art, it was something that makes the art for you. And maybe we're having the same problem that those easy cake packs had in the early 20th century when they were introduced, where, you know, housewives didn't want to use cake mix because it didn't feel like they were really doing anything. But as soon as the marketing shifted to just add an egg, all of a sudden there was enough input that it became your own creation, essentially. So now you had the hard part of measuring your ingredients. That was done for you. You add an egg, you whisk it up, pop it in the oven, and there you go. I think, you know, there's room for automation in every industry, but the automation should never really come at the expense of people's ability to exist. It should never come at the expense of the quality of the outcome. And it ideally shouldn't, you know, be used to negate a whole group of people's identity or collective identity. I think, like, AI as it is now allows for a lot of that. You know, there's this dream that, like, when I think about the drooling AI bros on Twitter gloating about how artists are now what's the word, obsolete. It's like,
Oh,
no, you know, like,
so
artists are by definition maybe always obsolete. They're not
yeah. You don't
inherently.
need art.
We don't need art in the same way that, like, we need food and shelter, but we want it. It's such a strong desire that it becomes a need in that way. So, you know, like, everyone can live without art. A lot of people do, but it really is just it's an intrinsically human thing. If you draw a dick on your school desk, if you scrape your name in a heart on a tree, if you draw a smiley face in the sand with a stick, that's your human desire to make. And to hand that off to the machines, I don't understand that really. And to take glee in giving yourself up
radical
to
efficiency.
yeah, it's just weird to me, and like I don't know, and I think it would be weird to me even if I wasn't an artist or an art teacher or involved in art. Like I still think it would be strange. Like it almost, like what's coming next? Are we gonna get like API enabled bots that do internet dating for you?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
that's the thing, isn't it? Like, isn't the ideal always like, oh, if I had a clone or whatever who could go and do my work for me, I could stay at home and watch movies or
Yeah.
play games or finally write that book. And it's like, that's art. You want your job automated so that you can do art.
Two things, Callum. Firstly,
Yes.
I'm reminded of that of a Twitter post that goes something like this. I want the AI to do my dishes and my laundry so I can write and make art, not do the art so I have to do my dishes and my laundry. It's a bit
we have it backwards.
Yeah, we totally have it backwards. And then the other thing was that the thing that I find it funny is that a lot of people don't seem to understand how anything works, right? Like the CEO of Zoom said that their company is going to develop AI replicas that are just going to like listen to all your meetings. But I'm like,
why?
Zoom is a videoing conferencing app. The AIs are not going to be on a Zoom call talking to each other. They're just if that technology could even exist, which it can't. They would just wirelessly communicate, and you wouldn't even need Zoom. So Zoom wouldn't even exist as a company. It's just
that's like iPhone coming out, like Apple coming out with a new iPhone that makes phone calls for you. And it's like at that point, if everyone has an iPhone, it's the iPhones that are talking to each other. Like, why are we doing this? Stop.
Yeah.
I think we've gotten to the point where we've like reinvented the wheel so much that it's we just keep doing it because we think that's what we have to do. Like, no, stop. Just we can like technology. We have so much need for technology and other things. Just leave this one alone for now.
I think what it is that all these companies have to continuously promise greater returns, right? They've got to make a line go up. And there's only so many ways that you can make a line go up. And I feel like a lot of these companies especially a lot of them are pivoting to AI, like Microsoft and Facebook and whatever. Because if they don't, the line will not go up and the shareholders will be unhappy. And if the shareholders are unhappy, everything hellfire deserves to rain down on the earth.
It's like so self-destructive too, because as soon as you come up with AI and it works, what the hell do we need you for? We have the AI now.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's the most short-sighted thing. Why haven't they made holograms?
I don't think
that you can draw on.
I don't think you could make a hologram, actually. But that's a technical conversation for another time. I feel like according to my watch, we're at an hour actually. Just about. So yeah, I think we sort of hit on it on the main sort of topics. A lot of these guys are really strange, asocial weirdos, and they're doing all this. They're getting into this generative AI stuff because it's convenient for them, because it obfuscates their insecurities, because they like causing suffering, right? And if AI art is able to do one thing, it's able to spread misery.
Yeah.
And it is something that has been with the movement. Fascists have always had this weird obsession with technology, where they're simultaneously hearkening back to a past that doesn't exist. But also, have you heard about Germany's tanks in World War II? That they were the quote unquote best tanks. They weren't really. But it's kind of like this fundamental paradox.
Technology can't say no.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, I guess as long as anything's under 13. But
Jesus. Yeah, we should stop.
All right. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Sibu, you can shout yourself out. Let us know anything that you'd like to plug.
I guess I'm on Cara now. It's an anti-AI art app. I don't know what the future of it is going to look like, because it's a bit more of a portfolio than a everything app. So it's not quite like Instagram. But if you'd like to check it out, I got in early enough to be just at Sibu.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And then my Instagram is at sibu.masters. So if you'd like to keep abreast there, I'd appreciate a follow.
Cool.
The links to those will be in the description if you want to check them out.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for watching this episode. We hope that you enjoyed it. Our links, our Patreon, all of that stuff, also in the description.
And if you truly want to support the artist, you can follow the link to my book and buy it.
You could buy Callum's book. Yes, he worked very hard on it. I promise
you'll only regret it a little.
Yeah, thank you everybody for watching. Take care and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Cool. See you guys.